copy-paste presentations. The first one will be by Anthony Mills. He's the CEO of Legacy Innovation Group, a company that aims to link insight and innovation, and he will talk about corporate innovation.
I have a mic here. Is the clicker up here?
Yeah, the clicker is at the top.
Okay.
Can we have
All right.
the clock, please?
We good? We good? Good afternoon. Thank you very much. This afternoon, I want to talk to you about what we're seeing as an emerging strategy in corporate innovation. And it's a strategy that exists at the intersection of insights research and corporate venturing. I call it connecting the dots, consumer, corporate, and venture. It starts out like this. Corporate innovation programs have been around inside of large organizations for some time now. But a lot of those programs are now starting to grow up or have grown up in the sense that they've come to realize that not all of their innovations are going to happen on the inside. What they understand is that the traditional organic approach to innovation, which often produces a rather linear growth curve, it misses too many of the opportunities that they can't see because their businesses are tied to existing frameworks and viewpoints. And we see that all the time. In a lot of these cases, they're tied to entrenched business models and rigid business ecosystems, stagnant government regulations, and waning value propositions. And this is exactly how startups like Uber and Airbnb come in. They come in with a very different value proposition and a very different business model that uses a completely different business ecosystem and gets around existing government regulations because they're regulated differently, and they're able to disrupt industries. So what's happening is companies are realizing that their own four walls are working to their disadvantage. But the interesting thing is it's often these large companies are the ones who have the resources needed to invest in the market research required to validate the nascent market opportunities. So I want to hold that thought because that's the real point there is they're the ones that have the resources to do the research. And yet, because they need to find so many fresh new answers on the outside, there's come to be a growing array of open innovation and corporate venturing options available to these companies. And the aim of these options, particularly with corporate venturing, is to give established businesses access to teams that are pursuing fresh new business models that are liberated from the existing paradigm, but to do so while having a financial and intellectual capital stake in the business. So really, we call this strategically targeted inorganic growth in the case of venture capital, corporate venturing. So that's really what I want to talk about. And the idea here is the model is the identification, qualification, and quantification of needs and opportunities happen internally. And then those market insights are used to guide a program of corporate venturing. And really, it's just those two steps. I want to unpack those in a little more detail to make sure they're clear and explicit. But the important thing, too, is that these things are something that's constantly ongoing. The business is constantly doing the insights research and constantly trying to use that to steer the corporate venturing. So in step one, the broad need finding and opportunity identification and qualification and quantification of these happen organically. So the traditional hunting grounds work is still done in-house. And this relies on a lot of traditional market research methods like trends analysis, secondary research, qualitative user research, and quantitative market research. Then in step two, those market insights are used to guide strategic corporate venturing. And there's a number of methods and approach inside of this from both the investor standpoint and the startup standpoint for approaching this. And in a lot of cases in doing this, it can involve using a syndicated venture research database that's aimed at identifying startups that match the opportunities identified in step one. So who's using this and what are they seeing from variations of this strategy? And we'll get to a couple case studies in just a minute. But in general, what we're seeing is where there are emerging market opportunities identified, and there are already startups that are working in this space. In a lot of cases, corporate venturing is actually the more expedient and the more cost-effective path to market than the traditional organic path because the traditional organic path often has a very long learning and development curve for the organization. So in fact, for validated market opportunities, our perception is that this strategy is, in general, cutting time to market and effort in market roughly to half as compared to organic R&D and new product development. And I have to clarify that the clock starts for the enterprise. The startups may have already been working on this for a year or two, but we're talking about the enterprise's clock. Once they decide to invest in this, now their time to market can be cut in fairly short. So I just wanted to touch on a few case studies real quick that I've had some involvement in our firm to kind of highlight some of this. In the first case, this is actually a Fortune 100 global manufacturer here in the US that we worked with, and we identified a niche market that is undergoing an exponential growth in activity in the market. And yet it has a big unmet consumer need in the solution. And unfortunately, this is still a project in process, so there's details I can't divulge at this point for confidentiality. But the point here is, what we did is we went in with them and we defined a business model and a product concept and a value proposition and a consumer experience around this. But we really needed to get down to the nuances of this niche market and understand it better. So we've actually worked on a number of intertwined qualitative and quantitative studies to get at this. We did some very early quick and dirty qual and quant work. Then we did a more detailed qualitative study, in-home study, videography, and so forth, and recently did an ideation session. And now we're doing a pretty heavy-duty quant study to really quantify this space. And we finished the programming last week, and that's actually getting kicked off today. And at the same time, our client doesn't really have any experience and background in this space. And so our recommendation to them, we went out and did some research and said, hey, there's startups working in this space. Our recommendation is that you actually invest in, from a corporate venturing standpoint, these startups and partner with them to get to market faster. So we're actually using the market research that's ongoing to steer which of these, what options we pursue there. And that is the path that's being pursued right now. Another case is a European automotive tier 1 manufacturer based in France. And they came to us and were asking about opportunities for growth in the US. And what we did, we looked at their product portfolio and said, given your current portfolio and the competition and so forth, even with geographic expansion, you're only going to get a very moderate growth rate. So we did some secondary research for them and looked at trends and what was going on in some allied space, and specifically in the connected car, the electric vehicle, and the hybrid electric vehicle. And through our research, it was really clear that there's a lot of synergy between what they already do and what's going on in the startup community around companies trying to do this. So our recommendation to them was to pursue a corporate venturing initiative to invest in these startups. And they took that advice, but the original plan is that we would go out and scout for startups for them to invest in. What they actually decided to do was actually more intriguing. They actually launched their own startup accelerator in France. It's called Azandus. And they launched that in January of this year, and they're working on really trying to get on the ground zero, which can be cost effective. They just have to place more innovation bets with more startups that way because it's riskier, but it can be cost effective to get in with them. So they're taking this corporate venturing approach with a startup accelerator based on the research we did. And then the first one real quick is actually, I just wanted to throw this in real quick. It actually comes from a little bit of the other side of the table. We were approached by a small business that had identified a compelling new consumer experience around social media and sporting events. And they asked us to help put together a business plan around that to go out and market the intellectual property rights. And so, and this is still in process too, and what we're targeting is to try to work with some of the social media companies to hopefully license the IP rights with the thinking that they'll seed a startup with this because this particular company didn't want to do the startup themselves. So really this can happen from both sides. And there was research that went into this in terms of really understanding the opportunity space and what was going on. And there's obviously, from more the technical side, the IP patent landscapes work that goes on too. So that was really just some examples of cases I've had some involvement in. Obviously, corporate venturing has been around for a number of years, and it's a very popular play in the tech space and also a very popular play in the pharma space. And this is just an example of a lot of tech companies that have corporate venturing arms. And the point I want to make here, first of all, is in almost all of these cases, some level of market research goes into validating both the opportunity space and the business model that these startups are doing before they make these investments. I've actually seen the market research on some of these investments here. So I know that that is typically done. The research is done to make sure they're investing properly. You know, and so what we're seeing the strategy is it can work. I mean, the point is the research will help you answer some questions about how you approach this space. What startups we invest in, how deeply, what's the best timing relative to specific market trends? Do they have the right solution for where we think the market's going? How do we best leverage that partnership to maximize our benefit? We are really seeing that work pretty effectively. So really that's the essence of it, and I wanted to leave some time for questions around this, and you know, perhaps it's new for a lot of people how that the market research is used to guide corporate venturing, but hopefully there's a few questions about that.
Yeah, we have time for one question. Anyone?
Sure.
Is the marketplace, if that's the right word, for matching, thank you. Is the marketplace or the exchange for matching needs with ideas available to lots of folks, or is that held pretty close to the vest?
So I think, are you thinking about the startups in particular or the actual unmet needs in the marketplace?
I'm thinking, well, it's actually the three, the startups, the unmet needs, and the companies who
Right.
can afford the research.
Right.
It seems like there are a very few number of players gating that for advantage, and I'm wondering how the market's laid out.
Yeah, I mean, typically it works like this. So companies are probably out doing their own, with their feelers, doing their own trend scouting, or they hire consultancies to do that for them and look at what they think are emerging market needs, right? And that happens fairly organically inside of the business. At that point, they may engage in some market research, but in terms of actually getting plugged into the startups, there are, actually you kind of saw it here, there's venture databases. This is from CB Insights. That's an example. There's some others, are probably the best known example. They actually run a very big database of, it's constantly updated every day, of startups that are getting into certain spaces. So there are, and there are others, and there are venture databases that companies can plug into to find out what's going on in the startup world, who's working on what. And so you know, you can actually approach it from two vantage points. You could say, what are startups doing and why, and how might that relate to us? Or we see a need, you know, what startups are out there working on it? Okay, so, you know, and then in terms of actually investing in them, you know, like you see here, a lot of times if companies really want to get serious about this, and I know General Mills is here, they're doing this, they'll set up an independent corporate venturing arm to manage this financially and legally and so forth, so that the main organization doesn't get encumbered with it, okay? But there's also other ways they can partner. I'm from Grand Rapids, Michigan. There's an accelerator there called Start Garden, and they have a partnership with a lot of the local businesses there. Now, they just started this year called Seamless, and the idea there is to give these companies, rather than setting up their own corporate venturing arms, they're investing in startups. They're all focused on IoT technology, but to give them ways to plug in. So you can plug in through incubators and accelerators as well, in addition to doing all-out corporate venturing. There's a number of ways to do it. Or you can just approach it from, like you would at M&A, you know, we're just going to acquire you and so forth.
Thank you very much, Anthony.
You're welcome. Thank you.